is Parkland Media.
Hit it! Welcome to Gunshots Straight from the Hip. I'm your host, Mark Gunn. The views expressed on this program are those of the host and guests and not necessarily reflective of anyone or any entity associated with this broadcast. This episode, and the children shall lead them. As of this recording, it's been just over a month to the day that America had another mass shooting. This time, it was 17 murdered and dozens injured at a Florida high school.
And it's just amazing how everyone's coming together as a community to show the love and support.
They told us we could walk out, but still have to be on campus. And then 20 kids just rushed the gate and left. And that, I guess, started this huge exodus. I'm pretty sure at least 80% of the school probably left. It was really powerful. It was really inspiring, to be honest.
Well, it's been a month since the school shooting, and we still care. We're still protesting. We still want some change to our gun laws, and we're gonna keep protesting until something happens.
As usual, the NRA's bought and paid for cowards in Congress offered their thoughts and prayers, and their admonition of it not being the right time to talk about gun control.
As with most tragedies, of course, we're hearing from lawmakers, and this time it's no different. Louisiana Republican Senator Bill Cassidy tweeted his sympathy and prayers, saying his heart goes out to the victims and their families. But for fact's sake, according to the Nonpartisan Center for Responsive Politics, the NRA spent more than $2.8 million on Cassidy throughout his career. That includes campaign funding and ads attacking his opponents. Ohio Republican Senator Rob Portman tweeted about the heartbreaking news, sending his prayers. Prayers are important. Portman also has benefited from $3 million in support from the National Rifle Association. Iowa Republican Joni Ernst asked her followers to join in prayer for those at school and thanked first responders. And those first responders do deserve thanks. But the NRA, they boosted Ernst's election efforts to the tune of $3.1 million. Florida Senator Marco Rubio, who sought the Republican nomination for president in 2016 and spent the day tweeting updates, called it a terrible day you pray never comes. His campaign benefited from $3.3 million in funding and opposition attacks, thanks to the National Rifle Association. Colorado Senator Cory Gardner tweeted his heartbreak for the situation and prayers for the first responders. But the $3.9 million of NRA funds have been spent to boost his campaign and attack his opponents. Arizona Republican and a great American, John McCain, tweeted his prayers just a short time ago. Well, the National Rifle Association has spent more than $7.7 million on John McCain, the most of any lawmaker by far. Florida Governor Rick Scott ordered flags to be lowered to half staff, calling the shooting a senseless tragedy. Scott, who is up for re-election this year, he enjoys an A+ rating from the National Rifle Association. Vice President Mike Pence, he tweeted about heartache and prayers in the wake of the shooting. He's got an A rating with the NRA and enacted a number of laws as governor of Indiana, including legislation allowing firearms to be kept in vehicles on school property. President Trump tweeted his prayers, adding, "No child, teacher, or anyone else should ever feel unsafe in an American school." Well, the NRA spent more than $21 million supporting President Trump in his 2016 election. Almost $10 million in ads and other pro-Trump material, and $12 million attacking Hillary Clinton. The thoughts and prayers are with the victims. The dollars and cents are another story.
And per usual, media talking heads were making the same tired remarks about mental health issues, seeing as how the murderer was another white male.
We've seen again and again the media focus on school shootings and oftentimes be biased towards white privileged students. Many of these communities are disproportionately affected by gun violence, but they don't get the same share of media attention that we do. It's important as people of the American society and people in the media recognize this inequality and that we work to solve it. First, though, we must call it out, and we must call it for what it is, and that's racial biasness towards us and many other people that's not only in the media, but is in our society, too, as a whole.
And, just like clockwork, proponents of gun control gnashed their teeth as they begged for Congress to do something. Anything.
As a prosecutor for years, in appreciating homicide and being able to talk with a judge about it and a jury about it, I had to look at autopsy photographs. When you see the effect of this extreme violence on a human body, and especially the body of a child, maybe it will shock some people into understanding this cannot be a political issue. We have to be practical. I support the Second Amendment, but we have to have smart gun safety laws. And we cannot tolerate a society and live in a country with any level of pride when our babies are being slaughtered.
What wasn't usual was that you actually heard from the victims themselves, teenagers that were survivors of this murder spree, and they were pissed.
If 20 first graders getting mowed down doesn't change things, why will anything change? But the student activism here does feel different. We've not had this before after one of these shootings. These students aren't just mourning, they're angry. They grew up in a generation of knowing how to build communities quickly. Their anger and their protestations here, I think, have gone viral fast. I think this is potentially a formidable new group of political activists here that could at least change the conversation.
Then things took a turn for the strange as the current occupant of the White House, I refuse to refer to him as the president, held what he called a listening session. It made for compelling television, but in the end, that's all it was. Another dog and pony show. Then it was back to business as usual as Congress gave lip service to possible legislation, but were silenced when their NRA masters yanked their collars.
Senator Rubio, can you tell me right now that you will not accept a single donation from the NRA in the future?
So, number one, the positions I hold on these issues of the Second Amendment, I've held since the day I entered office in the city of West Miami as an elected official. Number two, no, the answer to the question is that people buy into my agenda. And I do support the Second Amendment. And I also support the right of you and everyone here to be able to go to school and be safe. And I do support any law that would keep guns out of the hands of a deranged killer. And that's why I support the things that I have stood for and fought for during my time here.
More NRA money? In the name of 17 people, you cannot ask the NRA to keep their money out of your campaign?
I think in the name of 17 people, I can pledge to you that I will support any law that will prevent a killer like this.
No, but I'm talking
getting
NRA money.
No, because...
matter of fact, I bet we can get people in here to give you exactly as much money as the NRA would have.
But it's not. But ultimately, look, the First Amendment is as important as the Second. And therefore, you have every right to ask that question of me, and I'm here to tell you that I will stand for the things. Are you going to be accepting
money from the NRA in the future?
I've always supported, I will always accept the help of anyone who agrees with my agenda.
The NRA even got to the toddler-in-chief after telling several senators that he was on board with some of the ideas that they proposed.
The people in the government who are voted into power are lying to us. And us kids seem to be the only ones who notice and are prepared to call BS. Companies trying to make caricatures of the teenagers nowadays, saying that all we are is self-involved and trend-obsessed, and they hush us into submissions when our message doesn't reach the ears of the nation, we are prepared to call BS. Politicians who sit in their gilded House and Senate seats funded by the NRA telling us nothing could have ever been done to prevent this, we call BS. They say that tougher gun laws do not decrease gun violence. We call BS. They say a good guy with a gun stops a bad guy with a gun. We call BS. They say guns are just tools like knives and are as dangerous as cars. We call BS. They say that no laws could have been able to prevent the hundreds of senseless tragedies that have occurred. We call BS. That us kids don't know what we're talking about, that we're too young to understand how the government works. We call BS. If you agree, register to vote. Contact your local congresspeople. Give them a piece of your mind.
All the while, our kids were talking and the media was listening. They told us that they would take action because the cowards in Congress wouldn't. Part of that action was organizing through social media and ultimately the National School Walkout that happened on March 14th. A couple of weeks later, students from all over the country and the world converged for the massive March for Our Lives protest. This was the largest demonstration of its kind since the Women's March of a few months earlier and Dr. Martin Luther King's March on Washington from the 1960s. Their messages were strong, their voices were consistent, and they were focused.
6 minutes and about 20 seconds. In a little over 6 minutes, 17 of our friends were taken from us, 15 were injured, and everyone, absolutely everyone, in the Douglas community was forever altered. Everyone who was there understands. Everyone who has been touched by the cold grip of gun violence understands. For us, long, tearful, chaotic hours in the scorching afternoon sun were spent not knowing. No one understood the extent of what had happened. No one could believe that there were bodies in that building waiting to be identified for over a day. No one knew that the people who were missing had stopped breathing long before any of us had even known that a code red had been called. No one could comprehend the devastating aftermath or how far this would reach or where this would go. For those who still can't comprehend because they refuse to, I'll tell you where it went. Right into the ground, 6 feet deep. 6 minutes and 20 seconds with an AR-15, and my friend Carmen would never complain to me about piano practice. Aaron Feist would never call Kira Miss Sunshine. Alex Schachter would never walk into school with his brother Ryan. Scott Beagle would never joke around with Cameron at camp. Helen Ramsey would never hang out after school with Max. Gina Montalto would never wave to her friend Liam at lunch. Joaquin Oliver would never play basketball with Sam or Dylan. Elena Petty would never. Kara Lugren would never. Chris Hickson would never. Luke Hoyer would never. Marquine Duque Aguiano would never. Peter Wang would never. Alyssa Al-Hadaf would never. Jamie Guttenberg would never. Meadow Pollock would never.
While the kids were organizing, you had grown men and women, elected officials, saying the nastiest things about them.
The National Rifle Association fired back at the March for Our Lives on social media. A host on the NRA's YouTube channel called it a march for their lives and told the Stoneman Douglas student activists if their schoolmates hadn't died, no one would know your names.
Is this really all about politics, or is it all about keeping our schools safe? Because it is about keeping our schools safe. Then we have to have much broader discussion than the discussion that's going on right now. How about kids, instead of looking to someone else to solve their problem, do something about maybe taking CPR classes or trying to deal with situations that where there is a violent shooter that you can
How are they looking at other people?
I
would ask you, they took action.
Yeah, they took action to ask someone to pass a law.
Should Republicans be worried that these folks are going to come out and vote in a way that could definitely change 2018?
Yes, I mean, the energy is palatable. There's a genuine grassroots anger towards Republicans right now. It's been building up over the last 14 to 16 months ever since the inauguration of Donald Trump.
While these politicians were spewing their vitriol, these kids were also getting registered to vote. That's right. There were some 18-year-olds among the protesters.
Joining me now is Quintez Brown, president of the Black Student Union at DuPont Manual. Naya Madison, who is a student journalist at DuPont Manual High School, both from Louisville, Kentucky, where both of our United States senators are very conservative Republicans, very much for the NRA. So are you hearing back from the politicians in your state? Have you started to hear from them?
Not from the Republican ones.
Yeah.
John Yarmouth has been a great supporter of us, but McConnell, where you at?
Yeah. And you guys are right here in their backyard.
Yeah.
What do you want to say to them?
We need him to start paying attention. I mean, it's great that you're here in Washington and that you can pay attention to what you're doing here, but you're not paying attention to what's going on at home. You need to be home.
Right,
you need to listen to your constituents. We shouldn't have to come here to be able to see you and not even see you, to be refused at the door. And you have to listen to your people. We're journalists and we're contacting him as journalists, but we're also constituents. And what we have to say needs to be heard. And he doesn't want to hear that.
Quintez, what do you want to say to these very powerful politicians from your home state? You're from the home state of the Senate Majority Leader. What do you want him to know?
Well, I want you to know that, we are here and we want common sense gun reform. And if you're not going to give us that, then we're going to get everyone out here to vote, and we're going to vote you out of office. So if you want to keep your job, then, give us not what we want, but what we need, what humans need. We need common sense gun reform. Get rid of assault rifles. Come on,
when are you guys going to turn 18?
I turn 18 September 25th. I'm already registered.
And already registered.
October 29th, so we're registered.
And you guys are making the connection. You believe that this is about being in the voting booth.
Definitely. Emma Gonzalez, she already put an emphasis on it, because we do have some very inflexible congressmen, so maybe we won't get gun reform the next day, but nonviolent direct action takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. So one thing that we can do is get people out here voting, because even if we don't get gun reform, we're going to vote the people in office out, and we're going to vote people who want gun reform, who care about us. We're going to put them in office.
And if McConnell can't step up to the plate and do what needs to be done, then we're going to have to get out there and say, hey, look, you can't be our representative anymore.
If politicians still have an A rating by election day, you're going to be out. I mean, that's basically saying, I don't care about your lives.
What do your t-shirts say?
Never again.
Never again.
Never again.
And on the back, we stand together.
The teenagers are teaching the adults, and hopefully we are all listening and absorbing and learning. Quintez Brown, Nia Madison, an honor to meet you both. Thank you both for being here. Thank you.
Quick side note. Here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, if you're 17 years of age and will turn 18 on or before November 6th of this year, you can register to vote. Quintez and Nia already are. You can download a registration form at elect.ky.gov. That's elect.ky.gov. The fact that these kids are getting registered to vote is bothering quite a few people. In fact, the NRA was even provoked enough to have their mouthpiece threaten the media and anyone else who dares stand in their way of their agenda. The midterms are going to be interesting because while there are those that try to minimize what these teens are doing, they are doing their homework. They're doing a lot of research into who gets money from the NRA and how much.
What if our politicians weren't the bitch of the NRA?
It doesn't make sense that I have to wait till I'm 21 to get a handgun, but I can get this weapon at 18. I don't know.
We didn't address it, Mr. President. But I think
you know why? Because you're afraid of the NRA, right?
What if we all voted and said this is not okay?
It was an incredibly exciting election night. In a district, there never should have been a question that the Republicans should have won. They're sending a Democrat from the heart of Trump country.
Voters are sending a message. And if the president isn't hearing it, a whole lot of other people are.
What if we stood up as Americans and fought for our freedom and our children's lives?
Everybody is saying politicians who are corrupt, politicians who are accepting money from these organizations, you can't run from us. We are the people who voted you in, and we are the people who will vote you out.
Neither Republicans or Democrats are safe. Midterms, November 6th. Make sure you're registered. Make sure you vote. As of this podcast, these same students are hitting up their representatives to have town hall meetings during their spring break. After all, these are their constituents too. Now, there are those that say that this won't amount to anything. Normally, I'd be inclined to agree with them, but I know firsthand that when you go through something this horrible, it changes you. So I and a small group of others have a lot more in common with these kids than one would think. I'll share my story after this. If you're an advertiser, one of the most important things about getting your message out is actually standing out from the rest of the crowd. If you're listening to this program right now, this is where you would hear your commercial. As an exclusive sponsor to Gunshots Straight from the Hip, your commercial is professionally produced and gets a longer shelf life based on your needs. Gunshots Straight from the Hip is a unique and compelling program, unlike anything else in the marketplace. Episodes are also available for download on iTunes, and depending on how you tailor your message, the potential for new and repeat customers is that much greater. Best of all, it's extremely cost-effective. If you'd like more information on how to sponsor this broadcast, call Mark Gunn Media Inc. at 502-205-2085 or 502-407-0283. That's 502-205-2085 or 502-407-0283. This episode brought to you by the localplug502.com, a comprehensive website designed as a guide to a Louisville you may not know about. The best places for food, drinks, and fun, all off the beaten path. The localplug502.com was designed by a professional in the hospitality industry, so you get the real deal when it comes to places to go and things to do. This ain't your local boring Chamber of Commerce website. So if you really want to get to know the city, or if you plan on coming to Louisville anytime soon, check out the localplug502.com. Welcome back to Gunshots Straight from the Hip. We were talking about the March for Our Lives massive national protest organized by a bunch of high school students in an effort to get some sort of common sense gun control legislation from a very reticent Congress. Now, I was saying that I had a lot in common with the survivors of the Parkland mass shooting in Florida. I, too, am a mass shooting survivor. Now, I don't talk about it much because remembering sometimes makes me a little bit uncomfortable. But for the purpose of some much-needed insight by those who are critical of what these kids are doing, I will. September 27th, 2008. I was at a nightclub across the bridge from Louisville in Jeffersonville, Indiana. Now, I hadn't been there very long when there was a scuffle at the door, and pretty soon folks decided that it was time to go, and they began making their way toward the exits. Meanwhile, the scuffle spilled out into the parking lot while I was headed to my car. All of a sudden, shots started ringing out and everybody scattered. In the middle of my calling 911, the shooter turned in my direction and fired. As it turned out, he killed a woman who was standing less than 5 feet away from me. Now, there were no heroics on my part. There was no good guy with a gun or any of that bullshit. All there was after the shooting stopped was 2 dead bodies and 1 critically wounded person. The woman that fell a few feet away from me was face down in a pool of her own blood. Now, that's an image that I will never forget for as long as I live. Just like I know for a fact that any child seeing their classmate lying dead won't forget that image either. Now, during interviews, several students noted that they hadn't slept, and I could relate. Now, there's a myriad of emotions that you go through, and you never know when each one of them will hit. Now, I spent the night at the murder scene because the bodies had to be cleared, and the woman who died was right behind my car. Now, I remember being numb for the most part, but doing as best I could to help identify the shooter when questioned by the police. One of the most unsettling sights for me was after the bodies had been removed, there was a crew responsible for cleaning up the scene. Now, I watched as they power washed the ground where one of the murdered victims laid. Washing her blood away was like wiping away the last part of her existence. That sight always stays with me to this day, too. Long story short, the terrorist, and that's exactly who he was, is currently serving an 80-year sentence, while I and others that were there that night are serving life with a memory that forever changed all of us. I can tell you with almost 100% certainty that these kids are going through a roller coaster of emotions as well. I know I did. A few hours after leaving the crime scene, my wife tried to get me to go to sleep for a few hours. I hadn't been able to sleep, and I had a very important appearance later on that day at the Louisville AIDS Walk, and I wasn't going to miss it. Needless to say that I could not sleep because I did not want to relive what just happened if I closed my eyes. My emotional roller coaster ride began during the AIDS Walk, and it was my first encounter with anger. I was being interviewed on camera and was asked about HIV-positive people knowingly putting others at risk. There was a seething anger in my answer that it didn't come off as loud or anything like that, but there must have been something in my eyes that caused the interviewer to take a step back. I knew that feeling as soon as it hit, and what pissed me off even more was that I couldn't control it. The next emotion I came in contact with were fear and helplessness. Now, my wife and I went to an event, lots of people around later on that night, and for the first time in my life, I was uncomfortable being in a crowd. I was terrified. Now, we ended up leaving early because the longer we stayed, the more helpless I felt. Now, I remember going back on the air that following Monday and having my first sense of calm since the shooting happened. In a sense, I was home, in my element, and what I would learn later in therapy, happily distracted. Now, things came to a head when I was visited by one of the cousins of the murderer. Now, he was trying to convince me that I had everything all wrong about him, and this was the guy that almost killed me, and quite a few others. So the more he talked, the angrier I got. And it was an anger that was so intense that my wife had to remove me from the situation out of fear for the other person's safety. Now, anybody that knows me personally will tell you that it really takes a lot to piss me off. It was then that I realized that I needed help. I can imagine these kids going through the same kind of ordeal at some point, and I hope they get some sort of therapy. For now, they're channeling that fear, that anger, that rage into something I hope to God will make a difference. I hope through their efforts that they can come out healthy and whole, as much as one could be when almost losing your life. I hope they learn, as I did, that although the shooting was a horrible thing to happen, the fear and anger and rage we feel is essentially about the loss of control. We lost control of what we thought was the ability to be relatively safe in spaces that are supposed to be safe. The fear, anger, and rage was a result of having part of yourself taken from you, and you want to fight like hell to get it back. So far, these students seem to be doing okay because they have something to focus on. In my case, I focused on taking back control, taking back my power because I was changed. There was a Mark who was once empathetic and understanding. Part of him was replaced by someone who, at times, couldn't give a shit if someone lived or died. There was a Mark who once believed in being merciful to those that wronged him. He's been replaced in part by someone who no longer has that belief. He's somewhat of a creature of vengeance now. An old friend recently remarked that it was very seldom that he sees me smile like I used to years ago. Others have made that same observation as well. On the other hand, Mark has become someone who has embraced those dark parts of himself and controls them with great discipline. Case in point, after completing therapy, I decided to get a concealed carry permit. I've been comfortable with firearms pretty much all of my life and have used military-grade weaponry. I earned my CCDW, but have chosen not to carry a weapon. More specifically, a firearm. That dark part of my personality would rather beat you senseless with his bare hands anyway. It's my hope that these kids come out of this being pretty much who they were before the attack happened. I hope that their parents, friends, and families will continue to show them the support that they've been giving them, and I also hope that as they finally sleep, the nightmares pass. Now, for those of you that have a problem with what they are doing, the job that you and your elected officials have failed to do, I hope that you never, ever have to go through anything like what they went through. Their first fight is to be safe. Their next one, and a much longer one to come, will be to heal. You've been listening to Gunshots Straight from the Hip. The views expressed are those of the host and guests and not necessarily reflective of any entity or anyone associated with this broadcast. If you'd like to leave a comment or want more information about how you can advertise on this program, email us at gunshotsstraightfromthehip@gmail.com or call 502-205-2085 or 502-407-0283. All comments are welcomed. You can also download this and past episodes on iTunes and other social media outlets. Just search for us by name, Gunshots Straight from the Hip. Thank you for listening.
Parkland Media. No hype, no hoopla, just damn good work.